يوم يقول تقرر انسحاب أو صار انسحاب الجيش معي واحد خليلي فعينه دمع.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and our distinguished guests, dear attendees, our followers on the social media platforms. We welcome you to a new lecture organized by the Arab Center to discuss the current crisis in Sudan. This time, the unit of strategic studies will be discussing the recent developments in the fighting and at the political level and the impact of this fighting on the balance of power between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. Today we will be talking about the military developments in the Sudanese crisis. With us a distinguished group of academicians and experts in the affairs of the Sudan. We will delve immediately into our panelists because we don't want to lose any time. We have with us Dr. Mohamed Zein Ahmad. Please allow me to introduce him briefly. He is a retired brigadier general in the armed forces of Sudan, and he works as an expert at the Ministry of Defense in Qatar and a professor at Mohammed bin Ahmed Military Academy. And he has a PhD in political science from the African International University. He taught at a number of military academies in Sudan and contributed to some of the curricula followed by these academies, and he also worked as an assistant military attaché in Nairobi. He has a book entitled Sudan and America, the Impact of Conflicts on the National Security. And Dr. Mohamed Zein, please, you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much for the kind invitation, and we thank the Strategic Studies Unit at the Arab Center, and I'm very thankful to them all. They brought us together as military personnel and civilians to have this opportunity for the military people to meet with the civilians, and I'll be speaking from the point of view of the military. And I'm happy that Dr. Sidahmed, and when we study military history at the War College or Military Academy, we are always proud of the struggle of the Algerian people, and we admire their national anthem and the slogans Algerian fighters use. We really respect that and like it. And also there is some sort of intellectual and even blood relations between the two peoples of Algeria and the Sudan. In the Sudan, it's become our fate to engage in fighting. God Almighty says in the Holy Quran that fighting was preordained on you, and it's something you may dislike. But I'm looking at this from a positive point of view. We always tend to find that fighting, when it's imposed upon you, is something you do not like, but sometimes it's a blessing in disguise, and we have a poet in Sudan who says that in evil you may find some goodness, or every cloud has a silver lining, as they say. Not all fighting is evil and bad. Sometimes fighting produces a new security architecture, and when God preordains something, we have to accept it whether we like it or not. For this reason, I really hope that this war would finish soon, but all those who call for the end of the hostilities, they should answer the question, on what basis will this war end? Sometimes there is an existential threat to the state or the military establishment, and assessing the strategic situation which was presented to Putin in his war with the Ukraine was specifically that they decided in the final moments, they decided who would side with what side, but Putin based his position on what he considered an existential threat to Russia. If the Ukraine joined NATO, then that would probably threaten the very existence of the Russian Federation. War is an act of violence aimed at forcing the enemy to do what achieves your own interests. Sun Tzu and Cloud said that the war is an extension of politics, but through different means. We in the military have something we call the 4 facets of war: the advancement, the offensives, defensives, and when we say when armies usually choose one decision to take. To all armies, whether Russian or American, they have a command structure, and the chief of staff and the chief of the defense. In Islam also we have the pillars of Islam. The pillars of the military, they have different pillars for intelligence, logistics, and some have even another one for psychological warfare. So they assess the situation strategically for the state, and then the commander-in-chief would decide what to do. The second point, and to bring ourselves closer to the scene in the Sudan, it's well known that Sudan's area is 1.8 million square kilometers, and it's the 3rd largest in Africa and Arab country, and the number 16 in the world. And the theater of operations now is in the province of Khartoum, which is 23,000 square kilometers. Our map is not showing on the screen, but the capital is 23,000 square kilometers, almost as big as an entire country, and more than 12 to 15 million people reside in the capital, and the current population of Sudan is 48 million. The armed forces of the Sudan, the structure of the armed forces is more than 200,000 combatants. They are deployed throughout the map, this huge map of the country and the borders. 200,000 they are spread around Khartoum, the capital, and other parts of the country. The Sudanese army, according to international statistics comes in number 75th, and most of the armies is land forces, and whether the Sudanese army has fought wars in and outside the country, and they contributed in different theaters and fields of operation in the UAE and Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. But despite all the wars that the Khartoum and people who live and there was fighting in the borders in Damascene and South Sudan, and inside Khartoum there was also a force which came from Libya, which was headed by the Al-Ummah party, the party of the nation, and the Muslim Brotherhoods and others. The armed forces managed to defeat all these forces and protect the entity of the state. So therefore, the Sudanese army is highly experienced. They have a law also, the armed forces of Sudan, and this law was passed in 2007 after negotiations with the popular movement and members of this movement took part, and the law speaks about crimes against civilians, professionalism of the army, and also it very clearly states the doctrine, the military doctrine of the Sudanese army. We distinguish between the fighting doctrine, which speaks to why you fight, and the other doctrine teaches you how and why you fight. The other side, the rapid support forces, used to be called the Janjaweed, which was established in the era of the former President Omar al-Bashir, and they, in 2003, in the war in Darfur, they fought alongside the army. In 2007, the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, Mohamed Hamdan Hamidti Dagalo, carried out an insurgency. He was arrested, and after that a settlement was reached with him, and then he started small units which followed the military intelligence. They have around 10,000 militarized pickups armed with the AAA anti-aircraft guns and the like. They are very light, easy moving force, and their fighting doctrine allows them. At the beginning, there were less than 20,000 fighters during the former regime. And now, I think after the fall of al-Bashir and in the era of al-Burhan and the Hamdok government, they reached 120,000 members. The armed forces had a very clear position vis-a-vis this RSF, and there were many intelligence and assessment reports were presented to the former Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Mustafa Uthman Ubaid, to encourage the integration of the RSF with the proper army, but the opinion was that you cannot install these forces within the body of the army because their officers are by and large uneducated, and they should be at least secondary school graduates. But someone like Hamiti does not deserve to be a second lieutenant, let alone be a lieutenant general. But in the days of the Omar al-Bashir, they issued a separate law, although they became under the law part of the armed forces, but the appointment was in the hands of the supreme commander or the commander. There's a difference between the commander-in-chief and the supreme commander. The supreme commander is usually the president. In the United States, is the commander-in-chief is the president, and in the military, they have a hierarchy. Some countries have a general commander of the army. The Rapid Support Forces had their own law in 2017. They fought in Darfur, and their law is very clear, and there are many articles which state clearly that they're part and parcel of the armed forces and they should be subordinate to the armed forces. But their commander, when his forces increased from 20,000 to 120,000, he expanded his influence at the military level and the political level until they joined the negotiations in Juba with the armed movements, and then I will move very quickly about the roots of the dispute and the differences. There is a fundamental difference over how the rapid support forces should be integrated with the regular army, and also the command and control structure, which is the most important in the Sudan. C4I is the system they follow: command, control, computers, intelligence, and the commander of the rapid support forces has ambitions to start his own emirate, and that's why sometimes his followers call him Emir. He wants to start a kingdom joining parts of Chad and Sudan and other areas. And we know that because of this fundamental difference, I think the war did not start on the 15th of April, but started in Marawi. At the beginning of this talk, I said, I talked about the four aspects of war. When the army moves forward and is deployed, this is a kind of war, and all the intelligence spoke of a military coup on the 21st of April, which had a political objectives, and from a military point of view, to kill or arrest the commander-in-chief. And after that, the military assessed the situation, and they put some scenarios. I think the war broke out before the 0 hour that was intended for it. If we have time, we can talk about urban warfare. And one of the reasons why the conflict is perpetuated is because it's turning into a war of attrition. You have two choices in urban warfare. You either destroy the entire city like Mariupol in the Ukraine and destroy it. This is one of the strategies. Or the city remains, you keep it, but you attempt with ISIS in Iraq. They remained in the city of Mosul for 6 months. The Iraqi army, 100,000 fighters, the international coalition, they engaged in urban warfare and street fighting and guerrilla warfare. They fought for 6 months until they managed to defeat ISIS and also other cities like in Al-Fallujah. The first time America was defeated, and after a long battle of 6 months, they managed to gain victory, the Americans. Urban warfare is difficult, and you are according to the law of the armed forces, you have to also be responsible when you fight about if any civilian, even one single civilian is killed, then you will be held accountable and you may face a death sentence. The final point is there is a clear article in the law which specifies the duties of the armed forces, and if there is a threat to the state, whether inside or outside its territories, this is a very clear-cut article which requires the army to interfere. We can talk about how or why the army. One more point: there is a big difference in the armed forces between control and deployment. I had some maps. Military calculations, like in this map, the red areas, this is where the rapid support forces, the other areas are under the control of the army. Sometimes the rapid support forces can control some roads, but this does not mean that it controls the state entirely. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I'm sure your talk will raise many questions. Please, I want to remind our followers on the social media to use the Q&A feature to pose their questions. Now we move to our second speaker, and that is Mr. Osama Abdelsalam. He is a retired Major General and has a BA in English language and MA from the Karai Academy, and he is a graduate of the Numeiri Military Academy. He joined the Sudanese Armed Forces in 1986. He was a military attaché in Uganda and the deputy head of the Human Resources Department at the Chief of Staff's office, and he was also a director of the Military Research Center, and also Dr. Osama, you have 15 minutes. In the name of God, the most merciful, most compassionate, I greet you all, and especially my fellow Sudanese citizens. and I thank the Strategic Studies Unit for allowing us this opportunity, and I greet my colleagues, the panelists, and hope that although the email said 20 minutes, now we have a discount and we are given 15 minutes. It will be very difficult to use that when you talk about something like the crisis in the Sudan, for example. Anyway, some papers, or the paper we were asked to comment on, is a militia opposing an army, or an army, and we do not want to spend too much time on that, who supports which football club. It's not, the title is not meant to glorify the army at the expense of the militia or vice versa, because the army will always be an army and the militia will always be a militia. The first point I would like to talk about is the fighting which is taking place now between the regular army and the rapid support forces an ideological struggle. To respond to this question, we have to answer another question, and that is, what is the main reason behind this war? And every war has an aim, a military aim and a political aim, and when it comes to the military, this is part and parcel of the strategies. But from the political point of view, this war has political and the military objectives. Sometimes they can match, sometimes they differ, but ultimately the military objective should be known to all the commanders, although the political aims may not be so. And before the war started in Sudan, there was a war in the Ukraine, and we know the political aim for Russia is to invade the Ukraine and depose the Zelensky regime. This was a military aim, and this was at the military level. At the political level, the war wanted to stop the expansion of NATO eastwards, and this is very important for them. In regular conventional warfare, when we try to apply this definition on any war, it may be possible, but in the case of the Sudan crisis, this may not be so easy. These objectives cannot be set outside the scope of research and understanding the regional dimensions, the strategic assessment. Otherwise, it will be a leap into the unknown. I remember when I was junior officer, I was so preoccupied with taking decisions. Taking decisions is like a triangle. The top angle depends on your feelings and intuition. The other side is to do with the local and other regional consideration. If you focus on the material aspects, you may be called a coward because you will refrain from advancing or taking decisions. So after taking all these different elements into account and you go ahead without doing that properly, you will be accused of callousness. Hamiti does not know these things because he's not educated enough, but even if he did, then the decision he has taken was a leap in the dark. on the first day of the fighting, he said in an interview with Al Jazeera, he wants to arrest President Abdel Fattah al-Burhan or kill him, or at least to try him, because he said he is a criminal, and he carried out a military coup, and he wanted to try him. And look at the suppositions but he was just told to do things, but he does not understand. He said that the military coup was to serve the former regime, the remnants of the former regime, and he mentioned some names from the Islamic movement. This was the military aim. The political aim, if you want to focus on that too, also in the interview he said that he wants to achieve democratic transformation in the Sudan. He wants to bring democracy and civil rule to Sudan through the barrel of a gun. When it comes to calculations, the insurgency's military objective was not achieved, and this is not in dispute at all. The military is difficult because he was inside the hospitality suite, but he was defeated there, and 40 days into the fighting, we don't know how he can achieve that. The presidential guards managed to absorb the first shock when about 200 technical armed pickups stormed this military headquarters. And the beginning of this insurgency in the morning of the 15th of April, and the presidential guards fought ferociously to defend the positions. And after these calculations and the defeats inflicted on the Rapid Support Force, they managed to bring 27,000 fighters were all ready, and they all carry their personal guns in addition to the machine guns mounted on their pickups. 104 armored personnel carriers and more than 100 military trucks. And if we combine all these in terms of different armies, this is the equivalent of 18 brigades. 27,000 means 18 brigades. This means 6 divisions. They are almost half the size of the Sudanese army. People say the army didn't do anything. We are talking about 6 divisions, which is about half the size of the Sudanese army. The political aim to achieve democracy, I think the Sudanese inside, we are outside the Sudan when we talk. They always remind us that you are far away and you are in a safe place and war does not concern you. The political aim for the Sudanese people who live in the Khartoum, whose houses were looted, their monies were looted, they are internally displaced, and some became refugees outside. They can answer you whether the political aim of this insurgency was achieved or not. So therefore, the political aim was also far away from being reached. And some people accuse those who criticize this insurgency as demonizing the Rapid Support Force. I think they demonize themselves through their actions and the crimes they committed. Now, for the majority of the Sudanese people, they realize what they are. I think even if a Sudanese person who is in the state of insurgency against the state would commit the same crimes that the rapid support forces. They have mercenaries from Chad, from Mali, West Africa, Boko Haram, and some Chadian insurgency groups. So the background to this conflict is a political one. It's well known that the last political activity was to promote the framework agreement. The armed forces did not have a problem with it, although some circles had reservations against it. The straw which broke the camel's back was the question of integration and talk of integration of the rapid support forces with the army. Those who are behind the rapid support forces really said to them, you are now an equal force to the army, you can be an alternative to the army, and you can integrate the armed forces into the rapid support force and not the other way around, because you're a big enough army and you can do that over a period of 10 years. So the fundamental sticking point was this integration. The rapid support force and although they were enemies of the Central Council for the Freedom and Change movement, now they became allies. So the closeness between the RSF and the forces of liberty and change started by a person who is an advisor to the RSF, and he appears regularly now, Yusuf Ibrahim Izzat. Hamiti, most of his advisors were part of the old regime or the former regime. Gradually, he replaced them with new advisors because he wants to get rid of his past history. So he brought in this guy, Izzat al-Mahiri, and he is related to Hamiti, and he wanted him to improve the image of the rapid support forces, and to improve his image, Hamiti wanted to separate from his past and side with the forces for liberty and change. So therefore, ultimately, it's a military conflict with a political background, because in the Sudan, there can never be a military coup without a political background, and the aim is to gain power exclusively and solely and very quickly. How can we read the future? So far as armament is concerned, I don't think the army will have any problem in arming itself, and because a lot of military industrialization project and any weapons which are imported from outside, which can be subject of pressurizing the state, is very unlikely because they have their own sources. and the Sudanese army managed to stop any routes of the logistical supply lines, and many convoys used to come from West Sudan and through the seaports. It was aimed at providing support for the RSF. And the reason why the RSF they have a problem when it comes to arming themselves in the Sudan. The armed forces, it's not just a question of munitions. They have now a lot of support at the level of the public opinion. People who, in the 2019 revolution, who distorted the image of the army, now almost everybody respects the army, and this is one of the good outcomes of this crisis. I don't think now there is one Sudanese person who has even a small bit of decency and patriotism would accept these crimes and random killings, looting carried out by the RSF. Every day we hear about people being killed in their own private houses and cars. And of course, as we said, and the armed forces, I think, will rise up to the challenge and deal with the crisis. Finally, the war which is going on now is unprecedented. When we study tactics in military academies, you study different aspects of war, like advancing, retreating, urban warfare, fighting in built-up areas. The armed forces are doing all of these things now. So if this kind of conspiracies and treason face any army, then the rates of success may have been doubtful. But I think 99.99% people would say the army cannot deal with that. I think the armed forces have no option but to settle this fighting decisively. And there can be political tracks or information tracks, but these go in separate directions. There is no other option but to end this insurgency. No state, no government in the world would tolerate that an insurgency is carried out to force the army to accept the conditions of the militias. The armed forces have no choice, and they have to fight this militia. I'd like to assure people that the Sudan will not fall into the trap of civil war. Now the control is almost entirely in favor of the army, although there is talk of distributing weapons to retired military personnel. This is not a public call to arms, but this is aimed at these people to arm themselves and defend their homes. For example, when a fighter, a mercenary, comes from the Chad, how would he know which general lives where? But there are people who act as guides or scouts. Some of them, they show these mercenaries where people live, and they end up kidnapping doctors, army officers, police officers. Okay, the war, nobody can say when it will finish. The armed forces are trying now to benefit from the period after the truce and the ceasefire And although these ceasefires were violated many times by the RSF, and for example, when they attacked the Mint coin and printing house for printing bills and money, the army only moved when the RSF stormed that building. It's true now the cost is very high for civilians, but also to arming the retired and officers and military personnel is very important for people to provide their own security. And people saw these incidents that people were being kidnapped and attacked. We hope that God Almighty would save the Sudan and the people of Sudan and grant victory to the armed forces, the victory they deserve, and for people who provided all the support to the army.
هاي ولا هاي أبو محمد هاي ولا هاي. Thank you very much, Dr. Osama, and we pray to Allah that this conflict will come to an end very soon. Now we move to the third speaker, Dr. Aicha Elbasri. She's a fellow researcher in the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. She's a former employee with the UN. She posts a number of posts in the communication affairs in the UN headquarters and in UNDP in Sudan and UN mission to support Iraq in Baghdad. And she was the official spokesperson for the African Union, UNIMAT in Darfur, and also a communication consultant for the UN Demography Fund in the Arab world. She has a PhD in literature from Savoy, and she has published a number of papers in addition to a book entitled The Prison Imageries. Dr. Aicha, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Dr. Sidahmed Ahmad, and my thanks to the experts and speakers. And I sincerely pray for Sudan to come out of this crisis with the least damage and least costs. I want to go back to the background, although I don't have your expertise at the military and political level. However, I will try my best to raise a number of questions related to a very important, genuine concept, which is the militias. Sudan, like other countries, they face this dilemma of militias, and this constitute a challenge that need to be addressed. This requires the role of the empowering the country, empowering militants and militias who are unaccountable before anybody to act on the government behalf to commit violations. So I'll speak in a more wider framework, speaking about the army against militias, not only a militia. We're not speaking about a confrontation or conflict between the military and the RSF or the rapid support forces, but with other militias in addition to the RSF. And I'll give you a definition. There are a number of questions that come to my mind, so I'll try to raise these questions. If is the conflict in Sudan only limited to the conflict between the armed forces and the RSF, and if the army, if it's a legitimate army, or it's the army of the government? We have a noble group of Sudanese who we are honored to have them in the Arab Center. They know the track or the history of the governance in Sudan since independence. When Sudan became independent in 1956, the military ruled for more than 50 years, whereas the civilians did not govern more than one decade. And the country have so within this experiment, Sudanese experiment, we can see clearly that the military has a full control of the government, and it bears a huge responsibility for the situation we are witnessing now in Sudan. Just to introduce these topics, it's very important to start with the definition of the military, and Dr. Azmi Bshara came up with a comprehensive definition of an army, any army. He says that the modern armies, or the armed forces, who are divided to divisions, brigades, battalions, and companies, who are required to adhere and answer the commands of the Supreme Commander based on a hierarchy. These armed forces focuses on helping the stability of the country and defend the country. So the functions of any army are clear. Also, the military law 2007, which Dr. Mohamed Zein alluded to, it stipulates or defines the armed forces as legal, professional, non-partisan armed forces without any discriminations based on race, ethnicity, or background. So this is the definition of the armed forces, or the army in Sudan, and armies in general. As for the militias, there are a vast number of definitions. Rom Tupiana, he was a fellow and a colleague of mine when I was working in the United Nations, especially he specialized in Sudan affairs and the conflicts between the military and the militias. They are illegal or unstructured militant. They could be loyal to the government or opposing or insurgents. Paramilitary forces, on the other hand, paramilitary forces who are paramilitary forces who are aligned to the government structure. However, in the Sudanese environment and the context, the militia concept was used to speak about the paramilitary who are loyal to the government and who are controlled by the armed forces. The tribal militias, I would add, because of the particularity of Sudan, especially in the conflicts in Darfur, when we speak about militias, to speak about tribal militias, so under this definition, a question come to mind. We know that Sudan is not the only country that seek the support of militants and militias. We have seen an increased number of militias around the world because of the changes of the warfares, the urban warfares, the guerrilla warfares, and that cannot be fought by a regular army. So usually governments resort or seek the support of militias if there is civil disobedience or tribal conflicts. So, as I said, the government may, especially the local militants or militias, because they know the geography, they know the demography, and they know the fighting parties or the conflicting parties. Also, the low cost of running a militia, in addition to another dimension, which is the human rights concept or the legal concepts, because it allows for a number of countries to because some crimes are not regular armies are not allowed to commit certain kinds of crimes. So they would not be accountable before the international laws and regimes. Speaking about the militias in Sudan and their links to the government, unfortunately, Sudani people have been infighting even before the independence. So for an emerging state which was about to get its independence in 1955, they have inherited this problem from the British colonization and the Egyptian even ruling, which yield this division in Sudan. A tension, a tribal tension emerged in Sudan. And the occupations, either the British or the Egyptians, have taken advantage of these tensions and divisions. And we remember the crime that has been committed against the people of the North and the South. Two reefs in 1955, there was a massacre where a big number of people from the North were killed because the people in the South were fearing the Northern that they will, if Sudan gets independence, a civil war will break. So the northern part of Sudan were calling for a federalist governing system or self-autonomy, sort of speak. And we have seen fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the insurgents in the south in a classical warfare. So the regular army fought the insurgents in South Sudan. However, in the second civil war, which started in 1983, the strategy have changed, and Sudan has entered or had entered in the militia policies. And Numeri, we remember Numeri, the president then, the former president, with the nomads, the herders, for a number of reasons to fight against Sudan liberation movement in the south, in South Sudan. And Anania militias were fighting. So militias have not started in northern Sudan, but rather in South Sudan. Anania in 1963, they preceded the militias in northern Sudan. And maybe the people in the north copied this concept and established their own militias. So this new strategy, which relies on militias, especially tribal militias. Prior to that date, the militias were governed or mobilized by the local administrations. However, starting from 1983, these tribal militants were structured under a military structure with the army and the hierarchy structures. And this is the first experience of, and we have seen this concept established and consolidated with the Sadiq al-Mahdi until 1989. Sadiq al-Mahdi, the president of Sudan, or the prime minister, or this president, tried to legitimize these militias, and a committee was formed to study the concept of establishing popular defense troops. However, this concept was rejected, and with the 1989 coup supported by Hassan al-Turabi, the late Hassan al-Turabi, the militants took a wider and expanded dimension, and it was interwoven strategy. So in 1989, the militias changed from tribal militias to what's so-called the popular defense forces, or the jihadists. So these jihadist militias were considered the protectors of the regime, and al-Bashir used these militias to establish the Islamist concepts which was behind the 1989 coup, and they played a very crucial role at the national and local levels, and they were integral, and their presence were felt in South Sudan, North Sudan, and in Darfur, and even in Khartoum, the capital. Fast forward to 2003, the militias, we know that the Al-Janjaweed, the border forces, so these groups were formed to stop the outlaw, and Hemeti was the emir or the commander of these militias. They gained strength, and they were accused by the international community for the human rights violations, and Security Council decision in 2005, 1556, under the same year, the comprehensive peace agreement was signed, and the Sudani government was requested or asked to disarm and demobilize these forces, Al-Janjaweed, regrettably saying that if that condition was respected and executed, maybe we will not be facing the crisis we are witnessing now. Unfortunately, the government ignored that decisions, and they tried to, and they have established new militias, changing the names, changing even the uniform. And instead of disarmament of these militias, they were armed with heavy weapons and equipments. And we have Abu Tayra, a militia that's dubbed after the name of a bird, and there are UN reports that documented the violations and the massacre executed at the hands of Abu Tayra militiants. In 2016, which marked the establishment of the Rapid Support Forces, it was under the command of Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, or Hemeti. They were forced to fight the insurgencies although they fought against or they attacked non-Arab tribes, and these attacks were documented. In 2017, the law of rapid forces was enacted and defined these rapid forces as legitimate forces who are account or adhere and comply with the laws and regulations of Sudan, and they became under the control of the president or the commander-in-chief. And we have seen this move from Janjaweed non-structured militias to the rapid forces. So in this slide, I will try to show what has taken place after the coup or the revolution in 2019, December 2019. So we may ask, how come the military allowed these militia who were outlaws? They were outside to reach this prominent position. There were a number of steps that allows these forces to expand and gain strength under the auspices of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Daglo was promoted to Lieutenant General. He was promoted. So al-Burhan violated the military law and promoted Daglo to Lieutenant General. And he became the deputy of the military council and became the second in command in Sudan. The constitutional document or the framework agreement that has been signed in last December, both documents stipulates that rapid forces are legal and systematic or structured forces. Hence, the legitimacy. And this is a very dangerous step, especially taking into account what took place on the 13th of July 2019 when the rapid forces law was amended and the article number 5 was abolished. So upon this amendment or the abolishment of this article, rapid forces or rapid support forces are not accountable before the law and they are decoupled, so they are governed by their own law, and therefore these forces became an independent army. And from the legal standpoints, it is equal to the Sudanese armed forces. And some researchers say that these changes or amendments to the law gave more autonomy and independence at the financial and administrative levels, also mobilizations, and they have more privileges than the army. They are not accountable before the Ministry of Defense or the Chief of Staff. So this is puzzling for such actions to take place during the transitional period, gave more power to the rapid support forces, and the constitutional documents equaled between the armed forces and the rapid forces. The constitutional document stipulates that the armed forces and the rapid forces are national military establishments who are accountable before the Chief of Staff and under the command of the Supreme Commander. And so we can see that they are treated on equal basis in this very important document. Also, the geographical expansion of these forces is crucial. So during that time, we have seen a spread of commands of rapid forces throughout Sudan, especially in the strategic governance. 11 headquarters in Khartoum itself, and a number of posts near and inside and around Khartoum. So this expansion and the forces increased from 40,000 to more than 120,000 strong, and they mobilizing soldiers from areas even in eastern Sudan. So the recruitment increased to include the tribes in the east. So even the policies, security, economy, there is the armed forces and the rapid forces became almost equal, and this was a policy of empowering the rapid forces. But why? Who is the adversary? Why empowering the rapid forces? If this took place before the revolution, prior to 2019, we may say that this rapprochement or the closeness is aimed to fight the armed forces who were under the command of al-Bashir. However, after Augustus 2020 and after Juba agreement, the military became an alliance with the regular army or the Sudanese armed forces. I could give an explanation that this rapprochement was based on one objective, to confront the revolution, so it's a form of a deep state to topple or undermine the army and give more prominent to the rapid forces. So we remember a statement by Mohamed Hamdan Daglo in his dialect in 2014, and he said publicly, and his statement was covered by the media, the Sudanese media, and it was puzzling. He said in his statement or his speech in 2014 before he said, we control Sudan. Every fighter has so we are the government. And when the government the government has no saying without an army. So this is discretion, or this posting started even before 2019, started since 2013, when a law was enacted, rapid forces was enacted, and I will conclude with this slide, raising a number of questions. The armed forces have not learned from the mistake of the armed militias. We still have militias, tribal militias, who are very active in different areas in Sudan, including to Darfur. The border guards are still there are secret militias who are spread, the blood brigades, who are aligned with the deep state or the previous regimes. There are even militias who represent the political parties, Shiba Party in the east, And the biggest danger that confront us, the so the militias were informed after the framework agreement, and some militias were formed by high-ranked officers. Speaking about Kiyan Watan militias, who are supervised by the former spokesperson of the armed forces, Dr. Khalid Saad, and Sudan Shield Forces, who announced their establishment in Butana in the Al Jazeera, which enjoyed peace and stability for. I lived in Sudan for 5 years, and I visited every angle from Halfa to Juba to Darfur, and I sincerely hope that Sudan will overcome this crisis, and I hope I am false in my pessimism. Thank you very much, Dr. Aicha. And we share your hopes and aspirations. Thank you for shedding a light on the history of Sudan and the lessons that should be learned. Unfortunately, opportunity missed by the army. The final speaker in today's event is Dr. Fathelalem Ali Hija. He is a lecturer in security and cybersecurity in Juan Defense Academy. He holds a master in electrical engineering and information technology from Ryukyus University in Japan. He worked as a lecturer and professor in information technology in Japan, and he was a visiting professor in Houston and the National University in Malaysia and Sudan Science and Technology University. His research focuses on AI and cyber security and cyber warfare and their role in hybrid wars. You have 20 minutes. Thank you very much, Dr. Zein Ahmad, for this kind introduction. I felt a bit of tension because I was surrounded by military generals. I will try to speak about something different. I'm speaking about information. So I will start my kill the white lamb. Have you heard of this statement, kill? In the beginning of the 70s and 20th century, the Australian Prime Minister Edward Grove White Lamb, that was his name, and he was supported by Murdoch, Robert Murdoch, the media mogul. However, White Lamb, when he was elected as the Prime Minister of Australia, he tried to detach himself from Murdoch. It has been said that he was invited to his to a lunch in his private estate, and he was asked to fulfill a number of issues. However, he declined. So Murdoch said to his support, kill the white lamb. So the next day, the media outlets that was owned by Murdoch launched a fierce campaign against White Lamb, the Prime Minister, and within a short period of time, he was a call for confidence vote was, and he was the first prime minister in the history of Australia to be toppled. There is no doubt that there is an information warfare that is taking place in Sudan. And the cyber era, or the digital information era, which enables us to trans borders and for the information to reach the public easily, gives the information warfare a huge advantage. Also, the information warfare is stealthy in its nature. So the information warfare and the cyber era are means, or even that can be used in kinetic operations in the traditional warfare. So the hybrid wars, and I have been working in this field for more than 20 years. And remember, at the early years of the new millennia, we were calling for shedding more lights on the hyper warfare, where cyber warfare is used we have seen this manifested in the second Gulf War in Iraq, where digital arms or tools were used, and this has expanded in new conflicts. And we have seen this manifested in the Russian-Ukrainian war with the information tools and arms. I will not indulge in speaking about the minute details of these warfares, and the fighting and the conflict is still ongoing. It's a ferocious war, and it has its ramifications and impact on many Arab countries, especially Sudan. So, in addition to the kinetic war, there were war emerging in the cyber domain. So this sketch was drawn in 1993 at the beginning of the so this caricature where a black dog says to the white dog, woof, woof. So they are communicating through the internet, and says, so it means in the internet domain, who spread the information, who is behind the information, we don't know. And we have heard about the e-crimes, the artificial intelligence, and the emergence of the chat GPT. We know the NEC, National Security Agency in the United States, in 2016, after the Snowden fleeing the country. The intelligence community of the United States know every word we utter, every tweet we tweet. So don't be fooled by encrypted that you see in your WhatsApp messages. Nothing is encrypted. So this slide could be suitable for an academic classroom. However, let me just explain some of the concepts. The information journey We know that any piece of information starts from reality, from the actual world. Something took place and it is described by a piece of information that is embarked on a journey in the cyber domain from the beginning until the end. When we receive these messages, when you are chatting with others, we know that this piece of information or these tweets go through many black boxes of which we don't know. The conventional wisdom says that the problem with any news is the narrator, the source of the news, the source of the information, who could make or break this news. So this highlights that who are responsible for carrying or conveying this news to you take for manifestations the narrator, the source. Maybe it's TikTok, YouTube, and there is the consumer, the end user of the information. We receive a huge amount of information, and there are the means or the tools. I'm speaking about the IP providers or the so they may amend, change, or distort parts of this news or information, and there are intelligence agencies who maybe manipulate this information. And there's the fourth manifestation is the cyber. And there is structural fault in this which allows for the misuse or the abuse of the information. So the concepts of disinformation and disinformation. So the piece of information could be correct, however, it was taken out of context and became distorted and could reach to distorted understanding. And there is fake news, as Trump used to say, and this is true. Many pieces of information are faked with no basis. Also, one of the biggest problem in the social media, because they became the sources of information. However, they were not created to be a source of information, but rather to facilitate communications between users. However, latest studies has shows that 70 to 80% of the users, the majority of which are young, they use social platforms as the main source of information. Even conventional news outlets have a problem. Unfortunately, we became victims to the information and the misinformation, the fake news. In Sudan, we have the actual war that is taking place in the Khartoum area. Because of my specializations in information warfare and hybrid warfare and security, cybersecurity warfare, and for the first time, I have found out that the hybrid warfare, really manifested itself in the conflict in Sudan, especially this misinformation and fake news. The nature of this war, as my colleagues have explained, especially the generals, this conflict started because the armed forces, both the armed forces and the rapid forces, were in Sudan, in Khartoum area. They were so the people of Khartoum, unfortunately, and I have no doubt that the army have the better hand, the upper hand, or at least they have control of this war because they are still they are formidable army as well. They are still compact and we have heard through social media platforms as well as news agencies something different from what we have heard from the people inside Sudan who are suffering the burnt of this war. So the people, and we have heard them firsthand from the people, from the horse, so they have lived this experience, and we have no doubt that they are genuine in their so in this era, I do believe that there is a huge problem when it comes for so the dilemma we are having on how to stifle the information and try to distinguish between fake news and the accurate or the genuine news. And I think this problem is not limited to Sudan. It is the problem of the whole world that need to be addressed by politicians and non-politicians, the academia. Unfortunately, because of the shortage of time, let me there is a huge amount of fake news and disinformation, and I implore you and I urge you to make a screenshot of informations, and there is a discrepancies but what is happening in the ground on the ground and what is being spread in the social media. Also, what is being said by the international community is far away from the from reality. Also, in the information warfare, especially for those who are specialized in this field, we know who are running such information transmission and who is behind it. There is a campaign by the oppositions or the rapid forces because they are exploiting these and I think the regular army must work very hard to pay more attention on social media. Unfortunately, 90%, what we call the silent majority, who are just the recipients of the information on its face value. And I do believe that those 90% of the Sudani people do support the armed forces because of their fair and just cause who are keen to protect Sudan and protect the people. In the cyber domain, we need always to resort to reality. At the early stages, we have seen the rapid forces moved very rapidly to try to control Khartoum, and they were the attackers on offense, and the regular army of the armed forces were on the defense. And the decisive period was missed by the rapid forces, and the army was entrenched, and they tried to decide the conflict very quickly, and the rapid forces were trying to prolong this war. I don't have a military background or experience. However, in the hybrid warfare, we know that information does contribute to the prolonging the war and may prevent the conflicting parties to decide the fate of the war. By I end this lecture, and thank you very much, Professor Fathelalem Ali, for your you have addressed a number of very important issues. They are not necessarily linked to the internet, but Clausewitz for centuries have talked about the war fog and the information warfare, even in past centuries. With this, we conclude the formal part of this event, the lectures. Now we open the floor for the audience. If they have questions, please be concise and precise. We don't want lecturing, so as to allow for the lecturers to respond to your questions. We'll start with this. Please introduce yourself. Thank you very much. On the name of Allah, Dr. Jamal Abdul Rahman, International Affairs Consultant and a former officer. There is a very important point that we need to address. The root causes behind expandments of the rapid forces, increasing from 20,000 to 120,000 strong soldiers. We cannot ignore the regional impact and the aspirations of Dr. Hamdan Aglo. In addition to these factors, there are other factors, especially the war in Yemen, Sudan, and the rapid forces were the key elements who have fought in the southern border of Saudi Arabia. And we have seen the rapid forces who were supported and financed logistically and financially led to this increase of their numbers. Also, in the Libyan Libyan conflict, they supported Haftar, and even in the Gulf Rift, during the Gulf Rifts, rapid forces were accused of mobilizing their forces to attack Qatar. However, this plot was foiled. So there are external entities who have supported RSF in addition to Russia and Wagner. We remember the European Union have entered an agreement with the rapid forces to protect the northern and western borders to stop the migrants' flows towards Europe, and they were supported by millions of dollars. And the AU supported the RSF because they were helping in realization and execution of the European Union objectives. Also, Russia was who want to exploit the resources of Sudan. Again, the rise of the rapid forces, the rise of the rapid forces were facilitated by the support of regional as well as international actors. The mic, please. Navy Lieutenant Colonel, and I'm a researcher in political and military affairs. I have a question to Dr. Aicha. You gave us a historical background about the establishment of militias in Sudan. In addition to what Dr. Jamal said, there are factors who led to the establishment and the rise of the rapid forces. So I have seen discrepancies in what you have said and what Dr. Jamal said. So the rapid forces in 4 years increased 4 to 5 folds. Why? I think the secret is so we need to expand on this. Why the rapid forces have expanded 4 or 5 folds, and this could answer many of the puzzling and lingering questions. Also, as the regular army absorbed the first attack, and they initiated the counter attack, and they are making gains. However, so the war is just and unjust at the same time. For the regular armies, it is just because they are defending the constitution, they are defending the country. The insurgencies or the oppositions are fighting to make political gains or financial gains. And since Dr. Aicha, you have worked in the UN, maybe you have a different perspective. And even in the war with the South, there were militias involved because they want to take advantage of these wars to make gains that would maybe support their causes or make, as I said, financial or materialistic gains. Retired Brigadier Zein said, Sudan still under the control of the militant this dilemma, the supreme commander or the commander-in-chief in Sudan is militant, whereas the members of the government are civilians. I was born and brought up in Sudan, and my allegiance was always to Sudan, to the military, and to the flag of Sudan. However, when the conflict began, we have seen the military absence from the scene. They were not, and the colleagues in their lecture said that this conflict, the recent conflict, closed the rift between the military and the civilians and the populations, because in the past they were responsible for gross violations of human rights. However, as I said, but still the military is not carrying out their duties because they failed to protect us. We have seen them MIAs, missing in action. You have said that they are ranked 26 when it comes to the land forces. Where are they? And there are calls for the civilians to be armed. Against who? Fighting who? So this sleep in darkness, and again, I am not expert in military affairs. You have your roles, and we are civilians have our roles, developing the country in health, education, and economy. So what I understand from what you have said, or what we have thought, me, that there are the military, security branch, the intelligence agencies who know and could forecast what would or could happen. Now you say that you were surprised by this rapid attacks by the rapid forces who were tasked with protecting the electricity grids, the airport, the For so long you have given legitimacy to the rapid forces, and now you are dubbing them or accusing them of revolting against the country. People are in a dilemma. They cannot return back to their hometowns, to their homes even. So I'm seeking answers from you. You are generals. You claim that you are experts, and you claim. So I want you to provide me with clear answers to what is taking place. Don't claim that you were surprised. And another round of questions, Dr. Mohamed, the lady, and thank you very much, Mohamed Salooms. I just want to bring the topic to the title of this event. So what is what your assessment of the military situation on the ground right now? You have mentioned a number of points. You said that you compared between control and deployment, and from the map you have shown, we have seen that the deployment of the rapid forces is quite large. However, they do not have control of the areas. So, and you said that the rapid forces amount to 6 divisions in size. So who does have the upper hand, and who could decide the war sooner or later? My question to Dr. Aicha also, throughout the lecture, I was comparing to what is taking place in Sudan and what has taken place in Iraq, the popular mobilization forces in Iraq and other militias. You put the blame on the government who have not executed the Security Council decision. Then, if they have, we could have been spared this conflict. Do you think there is still a chance of an intervention of the international community or the United Nations to bring this conflict in Sudan to an end? I'm Amal Hamad from, I'm a student in Juan Defense Academy. Dr. Osama, one of the questions that came to my mind concerning the arrests among civilians and military personnel by the rapid forces. And news has circulated that there were informers who helped the rapid forces to arrest Sudanese people. Also, why the army has not were not able to end this conflict, since they are more advanced, more equipped, better equipped, and more experienced. Also, we have heard conflicting information about who's controlling what and who has the upper hand in what areas. So how can we, through this conflict of information, how can we siphon this information and at least know what is accurate? I would like to express my full support to the National Army. I have 4 questions. Dr. Mohamed Zein, the practices by the army on resorting to militias have this backfired, leaving the people and the civilians under the control? 15 governance in Sudan are void of the military. Why do we see this void on the hand of the government in many areas of Sudan? My question to Dr. Aicha, the role of the auspicious or the regional and international actors. And another question to Dr. Aicha, how can we understand? We have seen rapid forces using the civilian infrastructure, houses, hospitals, schools. They are trying to destroy everything the government have established. Wouldn't that raise suspicions about General Al-Burhan himself? We will conclude with 3 questions. We only have 10 minutes to respond. Dr. Haider. Thank you very much, Dr. Sidahmed. I only have a short intervention, but before that, I have a direct question concerning the social support or community support of the rapid forces. Are there social community components who believe that the rapid forces represent them? And a comment on what Dr. Aicha have said, the correlation or the relation between the military and the militias. Unfortunately, we have a politicized army who has been in power for so long, and it was apparent from the revolution 2019 that the military will not give up power, and unfortunately, usually militias arises when the role of the government or the military is weakened. So the Rapid Forces as well as the militias became prominent. I remember when President al-Maliki fought against the militias, all Iraqis supported him. But unfortunately, this will give more role to the military by eliminating the militias. So if the army emerge victorious without any legal commitments, will undermine the future of Sudan. So I do believe there must be support by the political entities. Hemeti did not commit a coup. Who committed the coup was al-Burhan, who toppled the civilian government. So Hemeti jumped on the bandwagon and took advantage of the conflict and to try to make gains for himself and his forces. Ala Najjar, graduate of the security, I do agree with the colonel in one point. I'm afraid that we have not learned from recent lessons, the fighting against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We have seen the Rapid Forces become formidable forces that has the capabilities and the capacity to defeat the armed forces, the regular armies. My question, why, from where they have they got this confidence that they are capable of defeating? You gave two scenarios, street warfare, guerrilla warfare, based on the deployment of the forces. So if the war or the conflict transformed into an open warfare, so my question, the armed forces are relying on what? I'm not So the armed forces has not waged a wide counterattack, fearing that if the war transformed into an urban warfare or guerrilla warfare, they will be on the defeated end. Hemeti is not enjoying the popular support of the people, and I don't think he has enough support that would sustain him for a long time. If Dr. Aicha allows me, I would like to just correct some of the information, or maybe one of the militias that you have alluded to is not a militia per se. It was security forces and Al-Baqara was Al-Baqara militia was used by Sadiq al-Mahdi, not al-Numeri. Also, Volker was instrumental in with his resorting or siding with the RSF in addition to other mistakes, led to more tension and contributed to the dilemma we are facing now. Civilian power gave political space to Hemeti by making him the deputy of the Military Sovereignty Council. Also, he was the head of the economic portfolio or dossier. And he's an illiterate, he's not educated, and he has no experience in economy or otherwise. Also, the Rabid forces was part of the holistic army establishment, and when there was a conflict of interest, they Dr. Fathelalem Ali, my question about the speeches of Hemeti, there were references that these recordings and the leaked audios of Hemeti were not true, they were not genuine, but rather from the AI. The political and military failure of running the state in Sudan led to the martyrs and the people who lost their life. I commend the information that has been provided by Dr. Aicha. However, I would like to add other factors that led to the emergence of the rebel forces. We remember that the Sudanese armies waged wars in southern Sudan, non-conventional wars in forests and bushes. Also, the ethnic factor. Most of the armed forces were parts of former militias. Also, the ideological dimension, the decoupling between the Islamists and the non-Islamists. Dr. Khalil, he was part of the Justice and Equality, who believed that the war in Darfur was jihadi of its nature. The dilemma is that the government armed tribal people to wage a war against the insurgencies, and also the regional dimension. There is a military and political aspects to it. Al-Burhan want to continue in power, and he forged this relation with the rabid support forces to prevent against any coup that would topple Al-Burhan. So Al-Burhan, as I said, he forged this alliance with Hemeti and his forces, which gave a prominent role to Hemeti and his forces. So we have this alliance between politicians and militants or the army, We have seen this repeated in Sudan time and time. One final point. What is different in this conflict, and that the politicians have the courage to express their positions in supporting this side or that side. The Al-Umma party and others fought against a Numeri regime. Al-Umma party fought against the communists. However, the nowadays politicians, both the civilians who support the army or the forces of freedom and change, they don't have the courage or the audacity to support the army, the regular army. Thank you very much for your interventions. Number of questions that we have received through the social media. What is the future of the militias in terms of the international complexities? Maybe Mr. Mohamed Zein would answer this question. Tariq asks, how much time does the army need to defeat the rebel forces, and if there is a hidden hand that provides support to the RSF for certain objectives, or for Al-Fadi Izzuddin asks why the Sudanese army throughout its history seek the support of non-conventional forces or armies. Final question that we have received from Uthman asks why the army was not decisive to take actions from the beginning, since they know beforehand that the rebel forces will attack the guest house or the presidential palace and other key things. They have apprehensions concerning revolting. If you asked any officer, if you want to fight, if you wish to fight, where do you, I will fight anywhere except city or street wars. I would rather fight anywhere, any place, because in cities you are fighting hidden armies, unseen. The American theory says one person can kill, sniper can kill 1,000 people if he is fortified. And urban warfare, on city warfare, the loss and the damage is huge. So the ratio is 15-1. You need 15 battalions of regular army to fight 1 battalion of insurgents. So this is one of the most difficult, more ferocious kinds of warfare, and the army have a strategic military objective, not necessarily fight with civilians. So unfortunately, we remember a show on TV and radio where you request whoever war are not managed by on the basis of the request of the people. They have their own doctrine, they have their own plans, and to destroy the. And I agree with Dr. Aicha. Rapid forces had 36 posts in very crucial areas, and the Sudani areas was managed to destroy all these 36 posts or positions. And I have a 30-year experience in military, and And the military forces need to be very careful because any violations against civilians, you are bound by the law. Even before firing the first bullet, I need to adhere to the law. We need to know the restrictions. So you would be accountable for any violations against civilians or of civilian infrastructures or posts. And if you violate based on the international humanitarian law, you would be held accountable. Also, the rules of engagements are different in cities from other areas. And I remember we have fought in the south, and the rules of engagements, you start bombarding the areas before you attack or advance. And this, we remember this took place or happened in the second Gulf War, where the American and the alliance forces bombarded and through artillery and air force the Iraqi forces before they advanced to Baghdad. And we cannot deny the fact that there were an outside conspiracy. So the army had no option but to have control of the rapid force positions and posts. So the army succeeded in attacking the logistics of the rapid forces, and I gave an example of Stalingrad and Al-Raqqa attack in Syria. So these are strategies that could be adopted by an army. However, in